Anyway, so I finally came up with my negative, which means that this movie is really good, and it's about it regards the character. It concerns the character of Friedrich Fromm. He's the commander of the reserve army, and he's a guy they need to be able to move forward with Operation Valkyrie once Hitler is assassinated. And it's never really, I just never really understood whether he, my negative really is that they didn't really fully explain his, like, situation and whether he was on their side or not. I get that he's the middleman and they don't really know.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's like, okay, he is on their side, sometimes it isn't. And that's a cool dynamic, but my negative is that they didn't really do enough with his character to, like, get me, like, invested in that kind of aspect of, like, oh, is he in or is he out?
And
it's kind of like,
the
I don't
funny
really
thing is
care
that
because I don't really know.
Their whole plan that they said they were going to do was offer him the new position and the new regime,
yeah,
and they never tried that.
They don't follow through with a lot of what they start up with his character. Like, the first scene with his character, von Stauffenberg and Ulbricht go in, and they're talking with him, and it's kind of weird because it's like, it's just, like, not very clear, like, I get that they're trying to, like, subtly hint that, hey, you'll be like the new Supreme Commander or whatever. But I don't know. The actor did a great job playing him. Like, I liked the performance by Tom Wilkinson, but it was just I never got invested in that whole, like, the whole thing about whether he was, like, in or out, because I never really understood his character enough and, like, what his actual, like, demeanor and, like, role was. He's just kind of this like, they call it, I mean, in the movie they call him, like, a careerist pig. Like, so, I mean, I don't know. His character was just kind of like, I don't know. Good performance, but it's like, what were you trying to do with him?
As you can see, we had to dig a little bit for this one.
Yeah, that's a very nitpick.
I just wish that some of those flaws are legitimate. Yeah.
I just wish they would have fleshed out his character a little bit more, because he is important to the plot.
And he ends up getting executed.
Yeah, I know, and he does get... Now, that's another thing. It's not really clear whether he is, like, why does he get executed? Because they found out that he was...
Well, yeah.
Because he gets executed months later.
So here's how I understand it. He was, like, had been involved enough that there was, like, dirt on him with this, and so his plan was to execute everyone before Hitler got there, in the hopes that would sort of, like, rectify him, but everybody who was involved were like, nah, you're going down with us, and you know it, and it was true. Like, they've
So, I mean, I guess his involvement is just that he, like, was like, oh, okay, I'll take the Supreme Commander role. But throughout the movie, he, like, really isn't on board with the plan. Like, he actively tries to stop them. And so it just doesn't make sense.
But there's other points where he allows them to continue. Remember where he's like, I'm going to pretend like I never heard this conversation.
Yes.
And so...
I guess I wish they maybe explained, like, how they found out about him.
I think that it was just impossible for him to get out, like, even though he was loyal to Hitler, because of the fact that he was the leader of the Reserve Army, and the Reserve Army was the one that tried to take over all of Berlin. Yeah, so it was hard for him to, like, get out of it.
Hitler couldn't be like, you're good. Like,
exactly.
No, you have to go.
I mean, I think he had
But it was, like, months later, so I do wonder if he was just on, like, some long waiting list of people that needed to be executed.
Or maybe they, like, Hitler couldn't make up his mind, or maybe they had some sort of... Or maybe, since it was months later, maybe, like, Hitler was going crazy and he was just like, kill that guy. But
as we saw in Downfall, that's basically what he did to everybody in that movie.
I mean, like, he got really paranoid there at the end. So.
Yeah. Anyway, but that's very much a nitpick. I just wish that they had fleshed out his character a little bit more and kind of, good performance, though. It wasn't a bad.
You want to talk about themes?
Yeah, sure. Or do you want to do history first or themes?
Oh, history. I'm not going to have a ton of insight on this one.
Yeah, I have a little... Do you want to tell us, like... You already talked about the costumes, but what do you think of... While I kind of get my notes up on it.
Sure.
Or my research. What was your overall thoughts on just the history and the historical situation? And
I've never heard of this event.
Okay.
No, like, I'd never heard about
before I told you about the movie and, like,
and the ploy to kill Hitler, because this came, like, really, if this movie is to be believed, this came, like, really freaking close to working. Now, I did know that there were lots of assassination attempts on Hitler's life from within the German government. I had heard that, and I know that this fed into Hitler's belief that he was, like, holy and set apart and destined to conquer all of Europe, because he just, like, saw all these assassination attempts just failing. Which you gotta wonder how they failed so many times, because this was not the only time that they tried to enact a plan like this.
Yeah. So apparently, one of the big like sources they used was, it says here that the Gestapo investigated the July 20th plot thoroughly, so the filmmakers had access to much documentation as they integrated the historical account with Hollywood factors in producing Valkyrie. So they used, apparently there was a lot of like evidence from the investigations and stuff. And that's like what they used,
Yeah.
and to like
That's
write
really
the
cool.
screenplay, which I
That's
was wondering because
really
it's not
cool.
based on like a book or anything. It's an original screenplay, by definition, and a good screenplay at that, like we
It's a
talked
really
about.
good screenplay.
But there were some. It says von Stauffenberg had an older brother, and he was omitted from the movie. He's not present in the movie. I don't know if he was part of the conspiracy as well, or if he just
He probably just
also,
wasn't relevant.
Yeah, he probably just wasn't relevant
You know,
enough.
I can't tell you if they got the facts of this accurately, because I haven't researched this, quite frankly. But I can take an educated guess and say that this is a very accurate movie, and the reason that I say that is because in historical movies, when they decide to deviate, they do it to enact very certain tropes, and I did not see any of those tropes present in this movie. And so to me, that's a sign.
Specifically?
Like just when they try to breach historical facts, it's usually because they wrote themselves into a corner and they want to make some sort of relationship work between characters. They want to push a love story, or they want there to be this thing that they imagine is very large and dramatic and heart-wrenching, and you didn't really see them doing that in this movie.
You have the love story between, obviously, it's not like, you have the love story, if you want to call it that, between von Stauffenberg and his wife, but it's very much it's not like obviously the main focus.
In Kingdom
of
of Heaven, for example, you can really sense, even if you didn't know the events, you could really sense that they were parting historical events for the relationship between Balian and Eva Green, Sibylla of Jerusalem. Like you get what I'm saying with that?
So because they needed a Hollywood romance.
Exactly, and so with things like that, you can really, and you don't really get the sense with that. Now that's just a gut feeling, and so that could totally be wrong. But I will mention that about the movie.
Yes, here's an interesting thing I've been reading. Or about one thing about von Stauffenberg. It says here, Bryan Singer purposely left out some of von Stauffenberg's macho moments in writing the character, such as the Colonel's refusal of morphine to avoid addiction. So he had some kind of quirks about him. Like he wouldn't use morphine because he thought he'd get addicted to it. And he was apparently quite a kind of an interesting, quirky guy. Whereas in the movie, he's pretty straight-laced. Like I'm sure he was straight-laced in real life as well, but we don't see any of his real quirks. He's just kind of this real serious.
I think they were trying to not make him look like a classic Hollywood action hero. When they avoided moments like that. You know, it describes them as macho moments.
Yeah. And another thing, so in the movie there's a scene at the end when they're all being executed, and the adjutant, von Stauffenberg's adjutant, like steps out and like faces von Stauffenberg. They're about to shoot von Stauffenberg, and he steps out and like faces him, and like, it's like an act of solidarity with the conspirators, and specifically von Stauffenberg. And he in real life, this is like eyewitnesses say that happened, like that he stepped out, but then it's not really known how, if they've all fired, how it wouldn't have also killed von Stauffenberg, because there's like 6 gunners, and like one of the bullets would have just gone by him and shot Stauffenberg. So before you comment, so apparently, according to what I read, the director decided they wanted to include it because it's like that's what eyewitnesses said happened, and so they were like, to make it more realistic, apparently the director was like, hey, let's just have 2 of the guys fire, and that's what happens, like they just like shoot him down, the adjutant, and then they kill von Stauffenberg after that. So they just wanted to make it, they were like, okay, so we want to stay true to what supposedly happened, but how could that actually have happened? So we need to make it more realistic.
It's funny how inconsistent ballistics are in Hollywood. Yeah. It's like 1 second you'll have bullets go through multiple people's heads, and in the second moment you'll have in this scene like somebody stands right in front of somebody else and takes a bullet, and like it just stops the bullet completely and it does not come out the other side. It's just, I watched a movie recently where a tank shot through the top turret of 2 tanks and killed both of them. It's like, oh my gosh. No, that was not in Fury. Okay. That was.
I have actually made a mistake. Hold on. Okay,
Whoa!
hey, I misread I misread my information. No, the adjutant never actually stepped out.
Okay.
That was an invention of the script of the filmmakers. But they knew that it wouldn't have been realistic if they had all the guys fire, and it wouldn't have also killed von Stauffenberg. Like that couldn't have happened. So they just had two of them fire.
I mean, if we're going back to real ballistics, that would have gone through that guy and hit von Stauffenberg.
Or maybe it's that they would have gone. That if they'd all fired, it would have gone. Or you're saying even two guys firing, it would have gone through.
Like it's a big old. I don't know what the Nazi rifles were chambered in, but like if it was anything larger than 9mm, then it would have probably gone through him and hit. I mean, especially with multiple impacts. But I mean, that's a nitpick, and it could have hit him in the shoulder blade or something like that. I mean, like you can't say for sure.
Anyway.
But
another.
No, you can.
Another little alteration they made. The character of Dr. Carl Girdler is a bit altered. He's the guy who they say like if the conspiracy is successful, he'll be the new chancellor.
Yeah.
And they have to like get him out of town there at the end because they have like an arrest warrant for him. And that guy in the movie is portrayed to be kind of one of the, not dissenters, like he's fully in on the conspiracy. He's like very hearty about it. But he's a little bit more, he's like the most cautious of them all. Like he's like, y'all guys, we got to be super careful. We can't he's basically kind of too timid to actually do it. And he's kind of portrayed, if one of the conspirators was like the antagonist a little bit, he would be kind of that guy. But in real life, he was actually much more like completely like, let's just do it. They wanted to have a character that was like kind of a little bit more like Doubting Thomas a little bit, and kind of like, should we actually do it? Is it too dangerous? So what do you think about that?
I think that this is a great segue into a good discussion that we can have considering the historical merits with another character. I forget what he's called. The dude with the glasses, the high-ranking general.
Oh, Ulbricht. The guy is also a little bit timid about it.
Yeah, so Ulbricht, I think it would be fun to discuss if Ulbricht would have triggered the plan immediately upon the detonation of the bomb. Yeah. Would it have gone differently? And how?
If he had, because he waits.
He waits too long.
And by the way, before we talk about that, in general, from what I've read, I mean, this movie gets like 99. It gets most of this story accurate. Like it's considered very very historically accurate movie. So what I'm kind of just nitpicking on, these are small little nitpicks, alterations made for dramatic purposes, but not like they don't like change the essence of the story. Anyway.
Yeah. So I was trying to decide whether or not the movie was implying that it would have gone differently.
Yeah. Because
the implication is that Hitler would have had less time to respond to what was going on. And so it could have been that the government could have been, under the control of the new government by the time he even tried to mobilize, because, during the coup in this movie, it's going really well, but then they start getting in conflicting orders, and then it slowly bleeds to where everyone figures out what's going on and they bring it back under control. But if it would have gone farther, it's like a virus, could it have taken over all the way? But I mean, the counter argument to that is if Hitler wasn't dead, then was he going to get control back, eventually, because of everyone's just blind compliance to what he says? So what are your thoughts on this issue, John?
So we're talking hypothetically, if he had activated it immediately. If he had said, all right, we're activating the reserve armies, and he forged the signature, if he had done that right away. I think that obviously they would have gotten farther along. Like they would have been, I think it was 3 hours. It was a few hours that he waited. It seemed like it implied at least. Yeah. So obviously they would have gotten farther along in the actual coup. I don't know if it actually. I don't think the coup had any chance of being successful.
Really?
Since Hitler was not killed. Because Hitler, however he would have done it, he would have at some point come back and did what he did in the movie. It would have been like, hey, take these guys out. Arrest them alive or whatever. So I mean, I do think that it would have given them a better chance at succeeding, if you want to think about it like that. But I think ultimately the fact that Hitler didn't get killed, that's what doomed the conspiracy. I mean, what do you think? I mean,
yeah, that's a great take. But here's another question:
what do you think they would have done? So if they had, so say they had fully taken over everything, which they don't. But say they had. And Hitler comes back in. What do you think?
Well, he comes back in with Hitler wouldn't have gone back to Berlin. He would have started transmitting orders from
The Wolf Slayer.
From the Wolf Slayer. And it could have been that if they were smart and they had taken it over, they could have like shut down communications from the Wolf Slayer.
Yeah.
In which case Hitler would have been isolated, and that's an interesting discussion, because then the idea that then he would actually have to physically come to Berlin.
Yeah.
You know, and
he still would have the Wehrmacht, like the most of the German army.
He would, and so it
would be like a civil war.
Exactly.
In the middle of World War II.
There could have been, and I don't know.
Yeah, that is interesting to think about.
Although I sense that you're right, that eventually it wouldn't have been.
Yeah.
But it could have gone on a lot longer, and it could have caused a lot of damage to the Nazi regime. Mm-hmm. It could have led to them capitulating to the Allies a lot sooner because of this insane internal struggle that's going on.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it would have been like a civil war within the war. Like in Germany.
Or
it really was a mini civil war.
What could have happened is if they could have cut off communications and convinced everyone that Hitler was dead, they could have engaged the Allies in negotiation and actually negotiated a peace before Hitler regained control, which would have led to a whole crazy thing. Because then obviously Hitler would disavow the treaty and the Allies would be rightfully really ticked off, and that would be a whole thing. So I think that's a really interesting thing to talk about.
So another, that is an interesting thing. Like how, what would have happened if he had not been too timid? If Ulbricht had like just been, all right, let's go ahead, let's do it. I love that scene though. Where you mentioned the line by the Bolde guy, like it's not about you, it's about Germany. And he basically is like, von Stauffenberg did his part. Now you cannot abandon him.
Yeah.
And that's some really good dialogue there.
But the funny thing is that it's actually von Stauffenberg that fails everyone because he didn't kill Hitler for real.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah.
It's not actually his fault because the stupid guy moves his briefcase, but like
it would have still killed him though.
I don't know. I think it would have a better chance.
I wonder how they actually. I mean, all the filmmakers knew, I guess, was that it didn't work.
Well,
they must have had to come up with how exactly. Obviously, it was not in the bunker, so that was one reason. And that's like a historical fact. But specifically, they probably were thinking okay, so maybe the briefcase was too far from him, or what they're talking about as far as the concussive force in that small space killing them, this is something that physicists call the balloon effect, and this is when the high pressure from explosives actually causes the liquids in your body to burst. And so this is a very common cause of death by explosion is actually the balloon effect. But the funny thing is that I noticed is the explosive force of the bomb that was planted in the movie picked Hitler up off the ground and threw him, which you can, check. It does show the explosion.
It does. It picks up Hitler and it throws him. Yeah. And as a rule of thumb, if an explosion has enough force to pick you up, usually the balloon effect will kill you.
Yeah.
And so if it would have thrown Hitler like that, it's doubtful that he would have come off unscathed. It probably would have killed him. It probably would have at least severely injured him. So, that's something you can look for in movies next time you see it.
One scene that, I don't know if you picked up on this, but I hadn't picked up on this. This is my 5th time seeing this movie, and I didn't pick up on this until this viewing. There's a scene where Fehlgeibel, their inside man that's going to hack all communication and inform them if Hitler's dead. He calls them to hey, Hitler's dead, but then he sees out the window that he sees Hitler out there.
Oh, I didn't.
Did you notice that?
No.
Outside the building, he's kind of staggering. It's a long distance shot of him looking out the window, but I didn't pick up on that.
That's crazy.
And so I was like, oh, so he Phil Giebel knew that he wasn't dead, and that's why he didn't tell him. I thought every time I've watched it, I was like, okay, so he must have just gotten nervous, or maybe the phone line hung up or something. But no, he just knew and he wasn't going to tell him. Mm-hmm. But yet they still obviously go ahead assuming that Hitler's dead.
Yeah.
Here's another little historical not inaccuracy, I guess alteration, because or whatever you want to call it. So there was obviously in this whole kind of story, there's obviously 2 assassination attempts. The first one they don't ever activate the bomb because it never really works out. The meeting's it implies that the meeting's kind of too short. They kind of all exit too fast and it doesn't work out. The first attempt, and in the movie both attempts happen at the Wolf Slayer. One of them, the first one, they're in the bunker, but they're not able to get the bomb off. The second one, they move it to the house, and obviously that's what kind of foils the whole plan. But in reality, the first attempt was at Hitler's home, the Bergdorf, or what I was reading is called the Bergstogen. I don't know if that's the same place, but the first assassination took place when von Stauffenberg went to went to Hitler to get the plan signed, the new updated version of Valkyrie, and he tried to assassinate Hitler there, or not there, but it was at another time, but it was at Hitler's home, I believe. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I'm pretty sure that von Stauffenberg tried to assassinate Hitler with the bomb at another point before the Wolf's Lair. The second attempt was at the Wolf's Lair. The screenwriter Christopher McQuarrie, from what I've read, said that they wanted to have both attempts at the Wolf's Lair because they wanted to have the first meeting inside the bunker to establish like that, if it had happened in here, they would have all died. But obviously, in the second attempt, they don't have it in there, and so that, I guess, that kind of like emphasizes that point. Like, okay, if it had been inside the bunker, it would have worked, but it wasn't. So that makes sense why they decided to have both attempts at the Wolf Lair, whereas in reality, one attempt was somewhere else, but not at the Wolf's Lair, and the other attempt was at the Wolf's Lair. But anyway, what do you think about that?
That's interesting.
I mean, I can understand, like, that makes sense from a filmmaking standpoint. But
you want to move on to themes?
Well, I have a couple more things, but fair. I have a question. What do you think about the weapons, the armor,
Yeah, I saw
stuff.
some.
We talked about the costumes, but
yeah. Weapons weren't. Here's the only thought I have on that is. Now, I'm not an expert in this, but there's this pistol that the German officers were using quite often, and my eyes might be getting old and all, but it looked like a Soviet pistol, a very common Soviet pistol design, not from World War II, but from later on, like that is carried like in the 1980s and stuff. There's no way that they made a blunder that bad, so that must be my mistake. But you would think that they would be using, what do they call them? That really famous 9mm pistol. I've shot one of them before. It's Allies.
1942.
Yeah, no, just the.
What is that?
No, it's called the. They're really they were prized possessions. Allies would try to find these pistols. You know, the one with the long barrel design is cocks on top. I forget what it's called. It's Lord have mercy. It's the black one with the. Where's my phone? It's not even here. But there's a different. You all probably know what I'm talking about.
I do. Yeah. The Germans had it in the movie.
Yeah. No. They didn't have it in the movie. They have it in actual World War II. I've shot one of these pistols. What is it called? It's a Luger. It's a Luger.
A Luger.
And you would think that the officers would be carrying Lugers instead of this pistol that looks very much like a Soviet design. I don't know. Maybe there's like some obscure historical fact there. Like, actually, the Germans preferred Soviet pistols. I don't know. But like you noticed it, probably when he cocked it like that on the table, like a Luger wouldn't have been able to do that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So I don't
know. I liked the weapons that we got to see when von Stauffenberg is driving up to the Wolf's Lair. It shows all these like camo soldiers that are like guarding the perimeter.
Yeah.
And there's some cool like machine guns that are in that scene. None of them obviously get fired or anything, but that was a cool scene. Like there's like all this netting and stuff, and they're like ready to like do some damage.
If some P-40 machine guns.
Yeah. But that was a cool scene. But another, so in the movie, it kind of alludes to and mentions that von Stauffenberg's uncle in the first scene where he goes to the meeting with the conspirators, they mention his uncle, and they're like, your uncle speaks very highly of you. Well, that's because his uncle, though he's not in the movie, was kind of a sympathizer with like he was anti-Hitler as well, and so I don't. He kind of probably might have. So he obviously. I don't know if he was in the conspiracy, but he did kind of, sympathize with them. And he's not in the movie, though. And so I don't really... his name was Nicholas Graf and Uxkul Jiglenband. I do not know if I'm saying that right.
He's definitely saying that right.
And
Jiggling Band is definitely how you see a German.
Yeah, and so there's this guy named Justin Cartwright who he wrote a book called "The Song Before It Is Sung" about one of the plot conspirators, not von Stauffenberg, and he said he described how von Stauffenberg was an appropriate leader for the plot. Quote, "He was the man who unmistakably wore the mantle of a near mystic German past, a warrior Germany, a noble Germany, a poetic Germany, a Germany of myth and longing." But apparently, the novelist, while saying that, also felt that Cruise betrayed the character as a quote troublesome cop, which I don't really get those vibes.
I don't see that.
I thought that he like I mean I mentioned it in my positive on the acting. Like I thought Cruise did a good job at like. I don't know. I mean, I don't know much about the actual mannerisms and like what the actual von Stauffenberg was like, but I thought Tom Cruise was very good in the role.
Oh yeah, I agree.
And then that author also was kind of disappointed that the film did not talk about what kind of Germany they were gonna like run, like what kind of government they were gonna install. Like it never really mentions anything about that. It's just not much at least. I mean, it's kind of just like. We're gonna take over. Get these bad guys out, and it mentions
they're gonna negotiate peace with the Allies. Yeah. I think that's the important.
Yeah, that was important. That didn't bug me. They didn't really highlight that. Yeah. And then it also Erwin Rommel, who was one of the most famous German field commanders, is nowhere mentioned in the movie. And but this is important because he was actually implicated in the plot. He was a part of the plot. Erwin Rommel. I mean, he was known as the Desert Fox. He led the German campaigns in Tunisia and North Africa, and he was very instrumental in the D-Day landings and trying to defend the beaches. But apparently, he was in this plot as well. Wow! And apparently, he was he knew his biggest kind of sin was that he knew about the plot, but he didn't. He knew about the plot, but that he killed himself because he knew about the plot, but did not warn Hitler. So he was going to get taken out. He was going to get executed. He did himself.
That was probably the worst casualty for Hitler.
Because Rommel, he was like one of their greatest generals. But it says he was forced to kill himself. So basically, he was executed. Yeah. Kind of like Socrates style there. Yeah. But he was forced to drink the poison. And then here, one last thing that I'm reading here. Like I said, the betrayal of Girdler was very controversial to some. He was not like all like he wasn't hurtful or irresponsible. This historian says the movie depicts Girdler in a quote hurtful and irresponsible way. And then also people were offended. Some people were like saying that they depicted Obrecht a little bit in an inaccurate way. But I think that they depicted him maybe as more timid because they needed some people in the conspiracy to be kind of like those kind of like for dramatic purpose. They needed those guys to like kind of offer this like counterpoint to the real like bold and like just let's get it done guys like von Stauffenberg. So I don't really have any. That didn't bother me. I thought that worked in the movie to have those type of characters. And final thing, here it says, actually the military conspirators were not aiming at a military coup d'etat, but wanted to open up room for politicians. On the other hand, Stauffenberg is shown as being driven by the persecution and murdering of the Jews. He talks about this at the beginning. However, in reality, the Holocaust was the primary motive for only a few conspirators. So I guess von Stauffenberg was only basically him and a couple others.
Well, the movie actually doesn't make a big deal of him sympathizing for the Jews. I actually disagree.
At the beginning, it does.
He makes one. There's only two comments that are made in the movie about the Holocaust. And one at the beginning when he mentions it as a reason that Hitler is bad, but he mentions it very much in passing. And then number two is when he says that they'll shut down the camps whenever they gain control. Yeah. And so I feel like many other Hollywood movies would have had him like get up on a soapbox and be like, this is horrible because the Jews are dying and we have to do something, and he never does that. Yeah. He mentions it very much in passing.
Yeah. I guess the point though is apparently he was only one of a few. Like it wasn't a main point of the conspiracy.
Yeah. Like, it doesn't portray that. It doesn't.
Yeah, I don't think it. Yeah, I don't think it did either. But anyway. So yeah, there's just little nitpicks people had, and with the historical accuracy. But overall, I mean, most historians have given this movie great reviews on like historical accuracy. And so, do we want to touch on themes a little bit?
Yeah, to wrap it up. Yeah.
What's your biggest theme? That you
So
took
I
talked a little bit about it.
Yeah, I talked a little about. It's funny because like themes was actually like one of my positives, but I think courage is one that you could put on here. You know, morality in a larger sense. I think moral courage is really the theme of this movie because it's really easy, as a lot of characters exemplify in this movie, to just sort of like shuffle along and do as you're told and try to end up on the right side constantly, and not get your scalp, forcibly removed.
Yeah.
On the other hand, there are always those very few people who remember what good is and what right and wrong are, and it takes an event like this to weed them out, but they're the people who have some real stiff stuff in them. And the reality is that if more people had moral courage, you could tell a lot of them didn't care for Hitler particularly. They just wanted to survive. And if they had had the same moral courage that some of these men had, Hitler wouldn't have lasted even a few days. He would have been deposed in short order. It's just that everyone got isolated and fearful, and they started thinking inwardly about themselves, and that's when bad things can happen. These people who had the moral courage to stand up to the regime, they weren't thinking of themselves. They were thinking of their country, and they were thinking of the future, and they were thinking of much bigger things. I heard an interview recently with the Prime Minister of Hungary, which is interesting because I was in that country recently. But he said that most people will say that the divide in today's politics is between left and right, and he says no, it's not between that. It's between people who think of themselves and people who think of others and larger things. You know what I mean? Like basically like an inward focus or an outward focus. And I think that's a great way of describing this movie. The people who were enabled the evil to happen were the people who looked inwardly and you sort of crushed by the pressure so that they were only thinking of their well-being. And then the people who resisted it and who almost toppled it were the people who thought outward and of others and of their family and of their country and things like that. Yeah.
So my biggest theme of this movie is similar to yours, just kind of like doing what's right, like even amidst great like danger and risk, and committing, like the idea of like committing yourself to like something you believe in and like committing and like following through with it and like passionately like believing in it and like believing that it's the right thing to do, and that's what all these guys do. We have talked about how a couple of them are portrayed a little bit more as, a little bit more timid and cautious, but they're still all in, like nonetheless, and they want to see the best for Germany, and they want the best for Germany, and so I think that theme of just like doing what's right, even though it might cost you to die, even like in the case of these guys, and I think that that kind of goes along with the theme of courage and just bravery. Like these guys were just like against all odds. Like I don't know if one like a computer today was to like calculate the percentage chance that this thing succeeded, like it probably wouldn't have been a lot.
Probably would have been less than 17%.
And yet they went ahead with it against all these great odds, and because they knew that they needed to. Like they needed to. As the line says, as Kenneth Branagh's character says in the movie, they needed to show the world that they weren't all like Hitler, and that they needed to show the world that there were good people in Germany that weren't just going to kowtow and like bow down before the Nazis. And so I just think that all those themes kind of the themes of bravery, courage, and belief to the in right to the point in the right thing to the point of death. They all kind of form this one big theme of just like doing the right thing. Really, is just like regardless of what could happen to you, and what others might think of you, and I think that's the biggest theme of the movie.
So, I think I'm gonna give this movie. This movie is at least an 8.5. I'm trying to decide if it's a 9. What do you think, John?
I give this movie for me, just real quick to establish kind of my tiers. This is how I kind of think of movies when I'm ranking them like 1 to 10. A 5 is completely like meh, like just like makes sense right in the middle. 6 is like that's a pretty good movie. 7 is like a solid good movie. 8 is like a really good movie. And then 9 is like an amazing movie. Now anything not above 9.5 or above, or really above 9, is like on its own kind of level.
Mm-hmm.
So I would give this movie a solid like 9. I really would. Yeah.
Wow.
I give this movie a 9.
Wow.
It's an amazing movie.
Yeah.
You know?
I'm gonna
I mean, I have very few flaws with it.
I'm gonna stick with my 8.5 rating.
Okay.
Yeah.
My only flaw, like I said, is that like one of the characters, his kind of whole role and the whole thing was not really clear. Like that's such a nitpick. Like there's no like major flaws in this movie for me. And so yeah, I give it a 9. Like but yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think that.
What are your final thoughts?
And
what would you say to people who haven't seen it?
Yeah, so this is a movie that I think more people should watch, actually.
Yeah. I
think this brings, just like Downfall did, it brings another perspective on history, but it, really buys me some respect, buys from me some respect for the bold and courageous German people who stood up to this regime.
That are often forgotten. That are forgotten.
I think this is a forgotten chapter of World War II that should be revisited, especially by the West. In general, so that's my
So yeah, like I said, 9 out of 10 stars for me. This is on its kind of own level, and it's one that like when I grew up, my dad loved this movie, and like my and he always like I would sit down, he would be watching it, and I'd sit down. I was kind of too young to like understand what it was really about, and I always seemed like it was like super long, even though it's only 2 hours.
Yeah.
Like as a little kid, like that type of movie would seem like really long, even though it's a normal length, 2 hours. But then when I grew up and I watched it, it was like really good. And each time I've watched it, it kind of grows on me. And it's like, man, that's a really good movie. And they did a really good job with that. So yeah, just to wrap up my thoughts, like it has great acting all across the board, especially from Tom Cruise. The screenplay, we didn't get to hit on a lot of the great dialogue, but just the dialogue is amazing in this movie. The tension is my favorite part of the movie. It's so well paced, and it's a great memorial to the event. And I love how they went out and they wanted to kind of pay tribute and tell the story of these courageous, heroic, and brave men, and kind of their story is a very niche story. Like it's a little corner of history that people forget about. But like Nate said, it's very important to remember these kind of small, but very significant moments in history, because we focus on in World War II we always think about D-Day and the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but yet while there were the Americans and obviously the Russians rising up against the Nazi regime, there was also these brave guys within the Nazi regime that were Germans that also fought back against it. And I think that's an important thing to remember. I think this movie does a good job of helping us to remember it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's a great final thought. So thank you for joining us for another episode of Let's Talk Movies. Soon, we are going to be releasing some reshoots of old episodes that were supposed to come out, but they will come out later. Please do enjoy the mustache while it is here, because it is going away very soon. And on that note, have a wonderful night. Have a wonderful Christmas season. We're filming this on the 28th, so it probably won't be the 28th when this comes out, but Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. The next episode that we will film will be in 2024, so
it may or may not be Troy, but that's not a promise.
We'll see. Alrighty, folks.
See you.